powered by Equilibrio Advisory, where our first priority is to create equitable, safe, and inclusive workplaces for individuals from all intersections of society. We are in the thick of Pride Month. The month of June brings us beautiful opportunities to spotlight the lives of queer and trans people and the different issues that affect the community. Today, we are going to focus our lens on queering pop media. At the outset, the concept of queering anything simply means challenging the conventional understanding of a subject. Now, when it comes to popular media, we often dismiss it as something trivial that cannot be included in serious discourses. But often, pop media becomes the space from where a lot of us form our earliest worldviews. Similarly, a change in our collective socio-political attitudes is often first visible through the changing trends of our popular media. Therefore, today we explore the journey of pop media in our country vis-a-vis the queer and trans movement in our country. Is pop media reflecting a shift in attitudes or is it still stuck in regressive modes? And to initiate us into this very important conversation, we have none other than the media veteran Ashish Sawhny. Ashish has worked in the media space for the last 3 decades in various capacities. He began as an ad filmmaker with over 20 years of experience. With gender and sexuality as his primary focus, Ashish has produced and directed many projects which went on to win awards. Ashish has also been the series director on the very popular Netflix series The Big Game. Ashish has equally dabbled in acting, having supporting roles in projects like Luck by Chance, Gully Boy, The Archies, Made in Heaven. A writer in his own right, Ashish has been part of anthologies and also an independent writer. He is currently hosting the second season of a one of its kind podcast that champions queer and trans voices from India, the Queer Podcast. You can listen to or watch the podcast across various platforms like Spotify and YouTube. And for the last few years, Ashish has also been practicing as a mental health counselor where he adopts queer affirmative and person centered modalities in his practice. We welcome Ashish to this conversation. Thank you, Ashish, for joining us today.
Hi, Usri. Thank you so much for that glowing introduction. And thank you so much to you and Equilibrio Advisory for doing this and for having conversations like this and for bringing people like me in. So, thanks very much.
We're equally grateful to have you. Let's start the ball rolling. Since we are talking about, popular media, and since you have this vast expertise in the media industry, so what do you think? What are your thoughts on the portrayal of queer and trans persons in media? The
Okay.
whole history of it, yeah.
Right. So, clearly, from my perspective, as somebody in their 50s, it has gotten a lot better with time and with, the evolution of the world that's happening around the world, where all kinds of diversity are now being, there is consciousness and there is kindness towards diversity. So I think it has gotten a lot better when I look back at the 80s, when I perhaps started consuming media. It was quite a dark place for queer characters and representation. And, we were usually used for comedy or for some kind of vulgarity. And one never really saw a dignified queer portrayal. One is not expecting that all queer characters should be amazing and saintly and full of virtues, because that's not realistic. But at least there should be some grace in a character. So it's wonderful now to see that all the industries, from mainstream Indian television to Bollywood and other regional cinema, to, of course, now with the OTTs being free of censorship and being free of having more niche audiences, they are way more positive in their representation of queer and trans characters. There's a lot more intersectionality that we see. Neurodivergency has been factored in as well. We do note that there is sort of commonality between neurodivergency and queerness, and that is also being mapped in its own ways. So I look at the glass as more than half full now.
Ashish, you were speaking about the negative portrayals in, which has been most of our growing up years also. When we look back at movies like Dostana, or trans portrayal in a very stereotypical way in movies like Sangharsh or Sara, where the trans character is a villain.
Right.
What do you think, a queer person growing up in those years, what do you think can be the mental health impact on for such portrayals that we consume from pop media?
Right, that's an interesting question, Usri. So clearly, it's very depressing and it's very confusing when you're a young person and this is how you see yourself or some part of yourself that you identify with on screen being portrayed like this. It creates very negative narratives in your own head, which is why I think we map exceptionally high statistics involving queer people and poor mental health, substance abuse, self harm, because you grow up feeling flawed. And when you look at a part of yourself on screen or a character that has same sex attraction, for example, you're not seeing something that's very nice. And I think, as someone personally myself who also was exposed to this kind of media, and it was, one of the first places that you learn about yourself, it can be extremely damaging and it can be extremely negative for young people to pick up on those kind of stereotypes. Because don't forget, it's not just the queer people or the queer kids who are seeing themselves being portrayed like this, but it's also their peers, it's also their classmates, it's also their friends who are seeing the same portrayals and then inhabiting and imbibing those negative kind of characters and portrayals. And for the long time, like you said, movies like Sadak, there was this trope of demonizing the queer character, villainizing the queer character. It was hard to find positive queer representation for a very, very long time.
Right. I was also thinking the converse approach to this is people who are like, there are still instances of homophobia and transphobia in our popular media, right? So,
Of course.
uh, to people who are like, still, sort of going for that approach and when the mental health impact of it is spoken about, they're trivializing it and saying that this is pop media and this is how it's always been. What would you say to that approach?
Uh, I don't necessarily agree with that sort of approach to such matters, because I think it can be extremely damaging, and we do pick up a lot of our notions and a lot of our ideas and knowledge about communities and about diversities through media. So if what we are seeing is negative, then I don't think you can just brush it away with one sweep of your hand, saying, "Oh, this is pop media, so it's fine. This is social media, so it's fine." No, it's not. It's still damaging and it still affects people, and particularly young people. Take yourself back to when you were a prepubescent or you were a teenager. It's very, very damaging at that age to see this kind of stuff being played out, because you know um, I'll be honest, I grew up at that age not wanting to be gay. I was not comfortable with that aspect of myself at all, and I tried very, very hard, and I don't think very successfully, to be straight, to date women, to date girls, to date classmates, to create these romances. Though I knew there was something that was intrinsically wrong, but I did not want to accept that very easily. And it took me a while to get to that stage where I realized that, what, this is my truth and this is my authenticity. And for the longest time, growing up, I came from a family of three generations of writers and filmmakers. And I mean, this is very boastful and conceited, but my maternal grandmother, my nani, is Ismat Chugtai, the Urdu feminist writer. And she wrote a short story called Lihaf, which is apparently regarded as one of the first examples in Indian literature of queerness being portrayed, right? Uh, I saw, I mean, or I didn't see because I was obviously not born when she landed in so much trouble in the 40s. But she was tried for obscenity by the British Raj because at that time our country was under British rule. And she and Sadat Hassan Manto were both tried for obscenity, and they both were acquitted because they actually did not find any obscene words in the texts. The meanings and the implications and the ways the story were told clearly referred to queer themes. But when I saw that struggle that she went through and the legacy that I had, I found it impossible to cheat that legacy. And if nothing, I knew I had to come out and accept this because I could not live in the same house as this woman who was my adorable nanny and be living a false life.
Right. Thank you for that beautiful, socio-historical context. Thank you for bringing that lens in. And I
Yeah,
was also thinking, like, for somebody growing up queer, either it's a laughing stock, that is the queer portrayal, or it's almost pornographic. That whole thing about queer lives being reduced to the only sexual aspects of
yeah.
it.
It's very
So
sexualized. Yeah.
yeah, very. And while that is a part of every orientation, but the human part of it, the whole part of queer lives, somehow often gets lost in translation. And I was also thinking how society is a reflection of what our pop media sort of everything sort of society's fall lines sort of come up in pop media portrayals. So I was thinking, what would you say now that we are starting to have more affirming narratives, slowly, slowly, more and more human portrayals? What do you think caused the shift in the last few decades?
I mean, I think if we look at India, I think, the coming of the internet, the opening up of India, the liberalization of, the 90s, in the 90s that started happening, we started getting satellite channels. We started getting channels like MTV and Channel V, which had music videos. I guess this is really before your time, Usri. You must have been a little child. But uh, I think because of those things coming in and the world kind of consciously evolving, it did start changing. And I think it's very important and it's very affirming now that to see those changes happening.
So we have a question in the comments. What
Yay.
do you think is a good portrayal of a queer person on television or movies?
Okay. Okay. So I see that's from Vamsi. Hi, Vamsi. Thank you. So I would say, I mean, I'm a little biased, but I would say Made in Heaven as a series on Amazon is an amazing example of a mainstream male lead protagonist who also happens to be gay. It's one aspect of his character, but for the producers and the writers and the directors, who I'm proud to say are all friends, for them to put out a character like this is an excellent example. I think they upped the game in season 2 by introducing a trans character, Trinetra, who's also a doctor, influencer, activist in real life, and who's trans, who's a trans woman. Casting her, exploring her narrative. So there have been a lot of very positive examples. I really liked Badhai though in the Bollywood space. I thought it was a very sweet, nicely done, portrayal of a male and female queer character and how they end up having a marriage of convenience in order to, survive in society. So I think there's lots more now portrayals which can be seen not necessarily as positive characters but as positive portrayals. Even a series like Class, which was on Netflix, that featured a queer romance, and it was also an how should I put this, interclass, inter-economic kind of strata romance that was very interesting as well. So there are more and more shows and series. I mean, there was a great documentary series on Amazon called Rainbow Rishta, which specifically featured queer characters and queer lives, and I thought that was beautifully done, and it was an important subject to put out there.
Yeah,
I hope
all
that
of these.
answers.
I certainly think it does. All of these examples you brought up, they are also very personal favorites of mine. I was
Yeah.
also thinking about while you were talking about class and the intersectionality. So till now, the struggle was to have queer people be accepted as human beings, and
Yes.
now we are sort of slowly delving into the intersectionality of queer lives. We are
Yes.
queer and trans people are not a monolith. The community is not a monolith. There are so many of us from so many facets of different intersections of society. uh, I was thinking about Gili Pucci, that
Yes. I was just thinking of the same.
Neeraj Ghewan's Gili Pucci, where a Dalit queer character and her dynamics with an upper caste person she feels attracted to is being shown.
Yeah.
What do you think? How important is it to show the intersectionality and bring in those nuances while having queer portrayals?
I mean, I think it's sophisticated, so it doesn't always translate, and you do have channels, and especially on television, which is much more mainstream and has a much bigger reach, obviously, than any of the OTTs. Uh, Over there, it does become a little complicated, without getting any of us into too much trouble. There is a certain right wing narrative that's at play currently. So it is a sensitive subject when you bring in religion or you bring in class. But I think it is very important and it's very effective and nuanced to bring in intersectionality. And I'm always attracted to that kind of intersectionality in my work as a director or as a producer or as a mentor. Because I think the more layers that you have, and I do try to do this on the podcast where we have looked at disability and queerness, we have looked at, politics and pride, where we also examine how politics can have intersectionality with queer people and the community. So I actually really am in favor, but I do understand that sometimes it does lead to more complicated layers which are not always easily comprehensible. But I think for a more sophisticated, privileged, educated audience, I think it does resonate with those audiences.
What I'm thinking of from what you're telling me is these conversations need to start so that we can bring these very everyday realities of our lives, because we
Yeah,
go through those intersectional realities, to a more mainstream audience where the conversations start. So
correct.
you have also been a producer on many projects. So mounting a project which focuses on gender and sexuality, what would you say? What kind of obstacles or challenges do you face in going about that?
Right. So I think, ultimately, we're not in a world where you can just make something and put it out there, and there is a bottom line. There are economics involved with media, and the bigger the bigger the stakes are, the more sort of concern and care there is about certain matters. So you do have to kind of balance that out in some ways. Uh, but I do like intersectionality, and I do like it when there are those nuances. Sorry, could you repeat your question? I think I'm just perhaps losing the track of what I'm saying.
Yeah, so in the while you are bringing these conversations to the forefront, as a producer, you have to go about a lot of executive decisions and all of that, right? So, what would you say are the challenges in sort of
Right,
when you mount a project like this?
right. The challenges tend to be what I referred to earlier, and hopefully as diplomatically as possible. But there is a politic and there is a narrative that is going around in the world. So you do have to learn that you can't go very against the grain. Religion, for example, in India is a very, very sensitive subject, right? So you do have to be careful that if you are putting out a queer portrayal or a portrayal of some kind of diversity or marginalization, how you balance those things out. And sometimes we do advise, like you do tell writers that listen, go easy on this because it can be too much. I mean, I'll give you an example which thankfully I was proved wrong. But a movie like Margarita with a Straw, which was directed by Shonali Bose, Kalki played a queer character as well as a character with disability, right? She was in a wheelchair. Uh, I remember when she showed me the script saying, "Oh, who will want to watch this?" You know, it's a very, I mean, it's too dark. You know, firstly disability, then queerness on top of that. कौन देखने वाला है? But actually, the film did really well critically, and it won a national award. And you know, it was a beautiful, beautiful film. I think. Uh, so it is up to you how you negotiate that kind of game.
That brings me to my next question. So, as the conversations are starting, as more and more of these projects are being, mounted, and they are also getting a better reception, what do you think is changing at the infrastructural level? At like, in the media houses, are the perceptions changing?
Yes.
In the production houses, are they feeling a need to bring in more such stories, or is it still the same?
No, it is definitely changing. It is definitely changing for the better. We even see big companies like Godrej and Axis Bank are now factoring in inclusivity and diversity as part of their, platforms. Channels like Amazon and Netflix have very strong and clear diversity, inclusivity issues that they like to take up. So I do think it's changing for the better, and I think it's a, like you said, media is a reflection of society. So, and vice versa. So in a lot of ways, what we are seeing is what is happening in the world, and as the world is becoming more conscious and evolved, I think media is following suit.
Right. So, now that there is a affirmative narrative that is emerging, I would like to believe that you are yourself a trailblazer in the media space. And what do you think is the current statistics right now when it comes to queer and trans people joining the media space, and what kind of what is it better for them to join the media industry now as opposed to maybe 20 years back?
Okay. So I won't be able to give you definite statistics because unfortunately, there is no access to exact numbers. But yes, there is a growing number of queer people and trans people joining media and being part of production houses in various roles. Earlier on, I think there used to be some kind of stereotyping when I was growing up. If you were a gay man, then you either went into fashion or hair or makeup or dance or, traditionally feminine fields. But now I think that that game is really, really changing, and it's wonderful to see that happen.
Now that there's an influx of queer and trans people in the media industry, do you think there is a understanding of diversity? Like you said, some companies like Godrej and Axis Bank are sort of starting initiatives in the media space. Do you see any change and any change in infrastructural policies around that, where they're being addressed to directly to the comfort and safety of queer and trans people?
Yes, I think that is happening. I don't know whether they are tabled policies. I know Godrej does have policies and benefits, and I guess the bigger corporations do. But even within the channels, for example, the show that I directed for Netflix India was the first documentary series coming out of India, which was the big day, and it was about big fat Indian weddings. And we were very lucky to get a gay wedding, to get access to a gay wedding and to shoot it. Uh, and Netflix were very excited to have that on board. They were very happy to include it. And as a queer person, for me to put out a queer wedding in a range of 12, 6 episodes, 12 weddings, to put out a queer wedding and to reflect modern India was really, nothing short of a miracle for me personally.
And now that you have such a varied array of experience, we would also like to sort of pick your brains going into the different roles you play. I would like to go a little bit into the fact that you are also queer affirmative mental health counselor. So when you go into that space, what are the unique challenges that come up when speaking to queer and trans clients?
Okay. So clearly, like what we were saying earlier, mm, a child is queer and gets exposed to the world and gets exposed today to a lot of social media, which can be very harmful, right? So they do come in with complications and issues and self-esteem issues, confidence issues, image issues. I do see a lot of that happening in sessions that I am part of. Um I do see them struggling because they tend to have two different lives. There is the real, authentic life that they're living, and then there is the life that they're projecting on social media, which sometimes is a different projection and a different life. And you do need to sometimes explain to them that also what they are seeing is that they are seeing somebody's happiest moments, they are seeing somebody's amazing holidays, they are seeing somebody's achievement, right? So they tend to feel smaller and smaller and struggle more and more because I literally get statements like, but everyone else is having a great life and I am the only one who's stuck in my life. You need to reassure them, and you need to kind of give them that confidence and empathy that they need, that buddy, I know it's tough and I know it's hard and I know it's a lot to negotiate at your age. I think the one blessing of my generation was that we did not have social media, because I think the presence of social media would have been much more harmful for my generation than just media was. Uh, so we do see a lot of people coming in with issues because unfortunately, a lot of homophobia, transphobia is inbuilt into our even into our educational systems. And there is something called institutional bullying which happens, which can be explicit, which can of course be very tragic and horrible. We've recently had unfortunately a spate of young queer influencers who've actually uh, died by suicide. So you do know that the impact is very, very drastic, and it does push young people to very, very drastic, extreme lengths. Uh, uh, so there is a lot of issues that come with the exhausting, omnipresent media and social media that we all have in our lives. I see that we're getting big fat questions.
Yeah, so let's go into a few of them. So, Rosanna asks, how should one preserve or invite the authentic voices and lived realities of queer and trans lives when considering their characters and stories? How important is it to have queer and trans folks play these characters, be part of the story building process?
Right.
So,
Okay, that's a
essentially, bring in representation.
Yeah, that's a lovely question. Thanks, Rosanna. So I think that also that narrative and that process is also changing. I do know now that production companies have sensitization workshops that happen with actors and with crew. I do know that trans people are brought in to give their authentic experiences and to guide the actors as well as the crew. For example, I saw LSD2 yesterday, which does feature two of the three stories feature important trans characters. And I did read in the credits that there was somebody from the trans community who was, a fabulous, very bright young person called Nandini Saban, who was actually helping them with sensitization, was helping them with, a lot of things, especially with the actors. To the second part of your story, this is a real issue that I think all of us face: the casting of queer and trans actors. Director friends tell me, but there aren't enough queer and trans actors, right? Of course, we all know and believe that the more authentic the experience of the actor is to the character, the easier in some ways it becomes for them to interpret and play those characters. But the playing field is not equal, you see. Yes, of course, an actor should be able to portray a straight character, a queer character, a villain, a hero, whatever. But because the playing field is not equal, you can't say, only cast queer actors as queer characters, because there's not enough. Luckily, that is also changing. We are seeing more and more queer actors, queer trans actors coming forward, taking part in auditions, starting to own their own narratives, which is, I think, wonderful.
We can go to another question. Ronnie Patro asks, as opposed to OTT, queer narratives and intersectionality are still largely considered no-go zones for producers investing in cinema for the big screen. Can individual filmmakers bring in change here?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I don't think it's easy, but I think there are producers and companies and production houses that are willing to take chances now more and more. Uh, we do see more and more, think of films like Badai Do, Chandigarh Tere Ashiki, Kapoor and Sons. So there are more and more, and I think India's recent performance at Cannes has kind of, I think, given a bit of a reality check to producers and to the industries, because independent films featuring queer characters, featuring actors who were very proud to play queer characters and have said so in their thank you speeches, have now made international impact. I know that Made in Heaven did very well internationally. The lead actor Arjun Mathur was nominated for an Emmy Award. So I think it is happening, but it's not easy. It's not easy for producers to invest such large sums into a purely queer-led narrative, because you do have to think of the bottom line. You do have to think of, if X amount of crores are being put into making a film, then the film should at least recover its cost and, of course, make a profit. Nobody wants to do a film which costs crores and months and years to make, to find that there are 12 people sitting in a cinema hall. So it's a balance, and I just hope it keeps evolving and keeps changing for the better.
Thank you for that. And I was also thinking that,
I'm sorry,
people who are,
but I'm having a real life crisis. I've left my windows open and it started raining. Can you just excuse me for a minute?
sure, sure, sure.
Give me a second, I'll be back.
We are speaking about queering pop media with Ashish Sawhny, and we are going into very interesting
Sorry.
spaces. And we have Ashish back with us.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, so Ashish, I was thinking, uh, as somebody with this, wealth of experience in the media space, and you have, while you were talking about your childhood and growing up years, and then your experiences with your nanny. Uh, I want to sort of go there and understand what would your advice be to young queer and trans, maybe filmmakers or DOPs or actors or singers, anybody who wants to dabble in the pop media space, and they're coming in here. What would your advice be to them?
I mean, I'd say go for it. Try and tell your own stories. That's a great place to start. You've had real life experiences. Everybody has a unique story. Everybody has a story that they can tell. So I'm very, very encouraging of kids. I mean, in whatever departments they choose, whether they want to be writers or actors or directors or camera, directors of photography or production designers. I'm very, very hopeful and encouraging. I know it's not easy. I know it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of inner strength, and you need to have good self-esteem to battle a lot. The journey is perhaps tougher than somebody who's heterosexual and heteronormative in everything they do and think. But I do feel that the difference that you have makes you unique, and it makes you special, and it gives you that ability to have and to own your own story. So my advice always is, I mean, educate yourself against prejudice and adversity. Equip yourself with a viable career so that you're financially independent. I do not tell queer kids to come out, because I don't think we need to subscribe to those Western notions that coming out is one big party. It's not. And in our complicated Indian family structures, sometimes coming out is just not possible. You can be disinherited, you can be kicked out of home, you don't have a job. So come out as you can, if it is viable. But please try to live your own authentic queer life, because you will see that the more you do, the more enriching and gratifying your life is.
this this beautiful dichotomy you speak about, coming out and living, not coming out because it can become a safety issue,
Yeah.
and yet trying to live your authentic life. Do you think this is something that a lot of, also from your capacity as a mentor to queer people and the queer community, do you think this dichotomy is something that becomes a unique life stressor for a lot of queer and trans children and adolescents and young adults?
Yes, 100%. It is a unique life stressor. It does bring with it its own issues and problems. I mean, I think you and I are fortunate that we've done, a course which has also opened our eyes and given us a lot of knowledge about that, the queer affirming counseling practice that we all did. Uh, so we do know that it brings a lot of challenges. There is no doubt about that, and that does need to be factored in. And you do need to have a special amount of understanding and empathy.
Right. So, thank you for that. We would go to yet another question from the. We have another question from Bamsi. Uh,
Okay.
what is your view on queer influencers, YouTubers, Instagram, especially YouTube, given they post long form content?
Mhm.
What kind of responsibility do they hold?
I mean, I don't know about the word responsibility, because ultimately YouTube and your own social media channels are meant to be an expression of yourself. But yes, they can be, social media, like I mentioned earlier, can be extremely damaging. So if you can be responsible, if you can be careful, I do see influencers putting out what they think are queer friendly videos. I saw something today which was this straight, very big Indian influencer put out a video, something called homosexual. And he was like, I'm not gay, but I love my homies. And if I was gay, then I would impregnate my homies. And it was so complicated. And it was so negative in a lot of what it was trying to say. And yet it was trying to fall under this bracket of, oh, I'm so cool that I'm straight, but I still can say that I would impregnate all my uh, homie friends. So it can be very damaging and destructive. But I don't know what can be done, because if you start policing social media and you start policing content, then all of us are going to get policed.
So, when we bring in queer influencers, what do you think should be the responsibility they come with when queer content creators come into the platform?
Yeah, complicated. I mean, we do have, again, this is a sensitive subject in a way, because the earlier queer activists and gatekeepers, a lot of their politics are not perhaps popular politics, or not perhaps politics uh, uh, that everybody needs to follow, right? They can be complex. So it is challenging, because you do know that the queer activists and the queer gatekeepers and the people who have access are the ones who are naturally going to be the influencers, right? They are naturally going to attract the bigger numbers. The bigger numbers they attract means the more collaborations they get, the more brands want to work with them, the more they are seen and heard, right? So it is complicated, but like I said, where do you begin policing? How do you begin policing? The only sort of request or plea is, or ask is that please be careful, please be sensitive, please be understanding that what you're putting out there, which you think is funny and you think it's a joke, is actually somebody's life.
Yeah, I think here we need to spotlight inclusive language. Uh, Here, I think we need to bring in queer affirmative practice beyond the therapeutic framework and make it part of mainstream discourses where we are talking to people and sensitizing them about queer and trans lives and issues.
Mhm.
And I think here we have a question from Rosanna. When we are talking
Question.
about
I don't think it's a question. Rosanna has written a chapter.
that is why the monkey emoji at the end.
Mm,
Uh,
right.
when we are talking about safe spaces for queer and trans folks at work, what do media companies need to keep in mind when it comes to curating such programs or looking out for such programs? What and the second part of this question is, what do we need to keep in mind while leveling the playing field in that regard, or at least reducing the challenges to queer folks at work?
Okay. Let me just take them one at a time. So, when we are
Sure.
talking about safe spaces for queer and trans folks at work, what do companies need to keep in mind? Okay. So, I think there's a lot of things. I mean, one book that I would recommend for all companies to read is Parmesh Shahani's Queeristan, which is a great book about the presence of LGBTQ issues in the workplace. Parmesh has actually, he's the head of DEI at Godrej himself. I think he has a lot of real life experience as well in those circles. Clearly, you need to implement policies, you need to implement benefits, ideally, actively recruit from the LGBTQ plus community, go to job fairs, educate yourself, have sensitization and normalization workshop. Bring in queer people to tell you their authentic stories. I think that is something that works well with younger people rather than reading chapters. I think it's much nicer when you have real people telling you their real experiences. That seems to resonate a lot more. Companies need to educate themselves about the special needs of the community, especially the trans community. They do come in with layers of complication. Very often, documentation is the first problem that a trans person has. Their documentation might not reflect their choice of gender or where they are in their stage of transition. Dress codes can be a problem. Bathrooms, loose toilets, those can become an actual problem, you know. So there are many, many ways I think that companies can start working towards helping their own spaces become much more inclusive.
Yeah.
And the second part of the question is, what do we need to keep in mind while leveling the playing field in that regard? So I think I've touched on those things. I think you need, you need information, you need education, you need sensitizing, you need normalizing. Language is a very, very powerful and very, very complicated tool. I recently did a DEI panel, and the host inadvertently and obviously with no bad intent said, but I as a normal person don't really understand. And I was like, okay, I need to stop you there, because I as a normal person is in fact othering me and the rest of us queers that are sitting here. So just a throwaway word like, oh, normal person, or I'm normal, but that in itself can be very damaging. It perhaps won't affect somebody like me who's now had 50 plus years of developing a second skin, but it can be very damaging to somebody young. And language is evolving and it is complicated. And even I have struggled with language, because sometimes I feel that I'm using bad grammar. How can I refer to one person is standing there and I'm saying, oh, they are going to the cafeteria? It doesn't come easily to me. I actually had to do a podcast episode with Rani Kohinoor, who's I think India's biggest LGBTQ plus influencer, and a very talented young person, who had to explain to me. And then I read something which really resonated with me, that language is evolving. If we look at the language that Shakespeare used, we don't use those words anymore, right? Language has changed. It will keep changing. Today, it is changing to include diversity and to include people of different kinds of marginalization. And if all it takes for us is a little bit of consciousness to be kind to other people, and a little bit of consciousness to be inclusive to other people, and to make other people feel more, their authentic self, then why can't you do that? Why can't you just make that effort? Why are you sitting there struggling and saying, I can't say he, she, these, they, them? It is complicated. It is challenging. But I think if it helps you to be inclusive and kind and reaffirm somebody's authenticities, then please do that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is a lot of uh, sensitization that needs to happen, especially around inclusive communication and pronouns. Thank you for highlighting that. There are a lot of people who go by the very puritanical, the grammar
Nazis.
argument. Yeah, and to that, if we can look at the history of language itself, it's such a malleable thing. not just the English language, every which language.
Yes,
It's not,
yes,
we don't speak English like Shakespeare used to speak English. So there is always a scope for bringing in different perspectives and expanding even our vocabulary for that matter, the way we
absolutely.
address each other.
And
So
even, sorry to interrupt, but even in
no,
a
no,
in a
sure, go
country
ahead.
like ours, like India, we all have what's called a mother tongue or a regional language. And
Yes,
there are actually research is showing that some of the regional languages are more gender inclusive and are kinder to multiplicities of gender. I forget exact words, but it has been shown that certain languages do factor in a more gender neutral kind of vocabulary. So I think the more conscious we become of these things, the kinder and the more inclusive we are.
yeah. In that respect, I can bring in the Bengali language because we have words like she, tara, which generally go with the they, theirs thing. We don't really,
Right.
when we are speaking about pronouns, we don't really have gender specific pronouns. So in that way, it is very organically inclusive.
Yeah. Right.
And
And I mean, we all know this. If you look at ancient Indian culture, we were quite a progressive, swinging, uh, culture in terms of sexuality, gender. I don't want to get into trouble by saying too much, but we did even have in Hindu mythology, we even had uh, gods and goddesses who changed their genders,
yes,
it was the plurality of Hinduism very much existed,
yeah.
and it's sad that those narratives have been lost.
There are a lot of mythological stories of Krishna changing into the form of Mohini, and
Yes,
yeah,
and
there,
many others.
yeah. So, thank you for bringing in all of these perspectives. One last question Bindya Rao is asking. Do you think series like Sex Education on Netflix helps in educating about the queer community? How do you think something similar in India will be perceived?
Okay. So, I mean, I love Sex Education. I think it's a great show for young people to watch. I think it's a great show for a lot of people to watch because it's very funny. It's incisive. It's interesting. It's layered with a lot of intersectionality. Even the people who play the parents on the show have a lot of interesting issues, right? Uh, I think it's wonderful. How do I think something similar in India will be perceived? Well, Bindya, if you find a channel or a OTT platform or a big Bollywood producer who's willing to make such a project, then please call me. I'll be very happy.
We'd love to see that. We'd
Yeah.
like sending prayers so that that happens someday. Like I was thinking, though the conversation has gotten started, there's so much multiplicity of lived experience that that multiplicity should also be reflected in our pop media. Like we need more conversation around women loving women stories, or maybe non-binary experiences, or the sort of troubles that bisexual or pansexual people go through,
Yeah.
and more queer people in love around the middle ages and the older ages. Why just queer people in their youth? So I
Yeah.
would love that also to
Yeah.
reflect.
Yeah, I mean, I have a problem with that. I think where are the 50-year-olds who are queer and falling in love and having sex
Yes,
lives? Where are they? I don't see any of them. And perhaps from your perspective, you don't see enough young queer representation. So it is interesting, and there's a lot more that can be done. And I actually am confident that a lot more will be done, and I think we will see, a lot more happen as the world goes on. And thanks to even your organization for doing something like this, because you are opening up conversations, and even if one person leaves this conversation with something to think about, then I think you've done a great job.
thank you for saying that. That is our intention too. And as we are coming to the other end of this conversation and
That was
reflecting
very
on,
quick.
yeah, I think stimulating conversations tend to go
Yeah,
by faster.
time
So,
flies when you're having a good time.
yes, and we touched on so many topics, right? From portrayal of queer people to representation, more queer and trans representation, to how, the mainstream stance, and so the stance of media houses and production houses is changing, and the role of queer mentors in the community. to bring in change. So finally, the thing that I leave with is how media houses need to play an active part. Production houses, the foundations of the media space, need to play an active part, while individual filmmakers are becoming trailblazers like you, who are persistent and their voice shines through. But for the larger shift in narrative to happen, these bigger infrastructural spaces need to support these voices,
Yeah.
these queer and
Yeah.
trans voices. And for us also at Equilibrio Advisory, we at Inclusion at Work, we also look at bringing in inclusivity and making safe and equitable workspaces. And I
Wonderful.
completely relate to what you're saying about bringing in awareness around inclusive communication, bringing in understanding the socio-cultural understanding of queer lives and narratives, not
Yeah.
othering them
Right.
unintentionally. The unconscious bias, thank you for bringing in that beautiful example of how normal is used so freely when it comes to talking about queer and neurodivergent folks, as if normal is this monolith, instead of looking at it as a spectrum, the gender
Yeah.
spectrum, the sexuality spectrum. So thank you for spotlighting all of that. We at Equilibrio are
Pleasure.
trying in our own way to
Of
bring in
course.
diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And we are starting our course very soon on
Excellent.
DEIB, called In This Together. And we are going to have a foundational workshop on the 27th of June for
Wonderful.
anybody who is willing to go into the understanding of DEIB, the understandings of diversity and equity as concepts, and how we can explore them. And we will further explore these topics in our larger course in July and September. And we have to make space for all the intersections. We have focuses on different groups like gender and sexuality, disability, including neurodivergence and caste, so that
Right.
every intersection of society is addressed and brought into the conversation.
Yeah.
And we'll be
Yeah.
starting this in two levels across July and September. So we are happy to announce that here.
Great.
So
I mean, please keep me posted. I'd love to also attend and also perhaps send people. But just one last thing that I want to say, in addition to what you're saying, that it is a proven fact, and there are statistics and numbers and research available that uh, companies that are in the top quartile of diversity show much higher profitability, much higher rates of innovation, much higher rates of productivity because of the inclusivity, and homophobia does cost our economy. I think World Bank put out a report in 2012 that said that the cost of homophobia in India was $3.7 billion for that year, and that was 2012. So it is also a proven fact now that it is the age of the personal being political on a lot of levels, and especially you younger people, you all align where your politics align. So you do prefer to use in a company that services or products that are inclusive. You do prefer to align with or subscribe to those companies where you read about inclusivity, where you know that there is diversity factored in. So there are very, very clear markers and numbers, and it's not just a moral or a business kind of argument anymore. Both things work with inclusivity and with diversity being factored in. So very, very big thank you to uh, you at Equilibrio Advisory and all your colleagues and people for doing stuff like this. Honestly,
yeah, thank you for bringing in that perspective, because what we don't realize it, queer and trans populations are there across every other intersection throughout race, gender, ethnicity, every other intersection. Queer and trans lives are present. So when you are not being able to include them, there is a big possibility that you are losing out on talent. And even if they're there, the productivity levels will be significantly lesser, because belonging, as we bring in the concept of belonging also within diversity, inclusivity, and
yes,
equality, that part is missing when you can't make somebody included, if you can't bring in the concept of psychological safety.
right.
So Yeah, I completely resonate with what you're saying.
I think we have one little question that's popped up if you want to close with that.
Yes. Thank you, Bindya. Bindya asks, I would also like to know, as a mental health professional, do you talk to people who are parents of queer kids? What has your experience been with them?
Yeah, I think sometimes we do have. I mean, I do have young clients who also kind of urge me to do a session with their parents, and I do that when possible, because sometimes you find that the parents are struggling more than the children. You know, they are so conditioned, and they are a product of their time, and they really do struggle with having queer children. I mean, the love is there, the heart is there. They do want, they do love and care for their children, and there is acceptance on that level. But there is a lot of fear कि लोग क्या कहेंगे, or but how there's concern for those children. There's concern, like I've had a mother tell me that I'm worried for my daughter, that how is she going to be. Her life is going to be hard, her life is going to be difficult, it's not going to be easy for her to find a partner. So I totally understand that, and I think it is important also to, where possible, sorry, speak to family members.
Thank you, Ashish, for bringing in all of your experience. I am so grateful to have this conversation with you. Thank you for spotlighting all of those various nuances that come into the conversation when we are, queering the conversation is not just a trend; it's something that will take our structures, social and political and cultural structures forward. Thank you for bringing this space and this generosity of spirit that you come with. And it was lovely talking to you, and we hope we do this soon again.
Great. I'm walking on clouds now. You're making me feel so good. But thank you all so much for reaching out to me, for thinking of me, for having this conversation. I really hope and pray that there are more such multiple conversations. I would love to be part of anything else that Equilibrio Advisory does. It is a bit of a tongue twister. Uh, but I would love to be part of whatever you're doing, and I wish you all lots of love and luck and joy, because it's you guys who are creating the new world and who are setting a new path for people.
And I will end with the last comment, which is not a question, but it just reflects what I'm feeling. Such a rich conversation bringing in awareness. So, thank you for that, Ashish. I am like supremely happy for this conversation with you. And yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining in and participating. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for the questions that made it so much more interesting.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
So many
and
questions and so
thank
many
you,
nuances.
thank you again.
Okay.
Bye bye. See you soon.
Bye.